Hello, classmates. Today I'll be discussing a topic that may be controversial and may be uncomfortable for some of you to hear due to the fact that some of you, and probably many of you, may have some sort of association with this topic. Some of you may have been directly or indirectly affected by this topic. In keeping this in mind, I ask that you open your minds and consider what I'm about to present and not jump to any irrational judgment. I ask that you listen before shutting yourself out because this topic may prevent future harm from happening. So these things considered, let's begin. Heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality are the main sexual orientations, but according to recent research, there seems to be a fourth sexual orientation known as pedophilia. To the public, it may not be considered a sexual orientation because it's actually labeled a paraphilia, and to the public, they may not accept it as a sexual orientation, but recent research and a consensus has deemed it to be a sexual orientation. In its simplest term, pedophilia is the sexual attraction to children who have not yet reached puberty. But just like the other sexual orientations, that is not the simplest way to consider someone to be a pedophile. In other words, most people associate child sexual abusers to be a pedophile, where in reality one can be diagnosed as a pedophile without having sexually abused a child, and one does not have to be diagnosed as a pedophile even having sexually abused a child. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders does not define someone who sexually abused a child as a pedophile, but this does not mean that someone who has sexually abused a child has pedophilic tendencies. For instance, other types of offenders include sexually curious or abusive adolescents who molest younger children, hypersexual adults who opportunistically target children, and people who act impulsively, rather in response to erotic attachment, usually under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Also, half of child sexual abuse victims are between the ages of 12 to 17, which is considered post-pubescent, so their offenders do not meet the strict definition of pedophilia. The current version, however, of the DSM, DSM-5, is expanding this disorder to include hebephilia, which is the sexual attraction to pubescent minors. Although the DSM includes sexual abuse of minors to be a criteria to diagnose pedophilia, someone can be a pedophile without ever acting on their sexual urges. It seems that the best way to diagnose pedophilia is assessing whether an individual has a dominant sexual preference for prepubescent minors along with the desire to commit sexual acts. So the question is now, what exactly causes someone to have a sexual preference for children? Well, asking how someone can be sexually attracted to a child is like asking how someone can be sexually attracted to the same sex. According to the Harvard Mental Health Letter article titled Pessimism About Pedophilia, there actually has been a consensus to prove that pedophilia is actually a sexual orientation. Just like the other sexual orientations, it is very challenging to determine what causes the sexual preference, especially when little research has been done to figure this out. There is a scarcity of research when it comes to understanding the pedophilic mindset. There has actually been one study done to see the amygdala activation in a selected group of pedophiles, since the amygdala is associated with emotional evaluation and arousal. This study took 10 male adults with pedophilia, exclusively attracted to boys, who were all convicted sex offenders, and compared their amygdala activation with 10 male-matched heterosexuals. The subjects were shown images of men, women, boys, and girls in a non-sexual manner, and the researchers captured the participants' brain images using a functional magnetic resonance imaging paradigm. The researchers found that significant amygdala activation occurred when the men with pedophilia were shown images of boys, and hardly any amygdala activation occurred when the other men were shown images of boys, girls, or men. But the reverse happened when they were shown images of women. Basically, the control group of men were aroused by images of women, while the sample group was aroused by boys, just as predicted. This study is one of the first to research the neurological correlates of pedophilia. Until more research is done on understanding pedophilia, the next step in the meantime is to see if pedophilia can be treated. A few treatment options have been tried, such as psychotherapy and drug treatment. Psychotherapy has been used where the focus of therapy is to enable the patient to recognize and overcome rationalizations about their behavior, such as when a pedophile would say, I was mainly loving the child, where in reality they were actually hurting the child. And in addition, therapy may involve empathy training and techniques in sexual impulse control. Drug treatment has been tried where drugs that suppress production of the male hormone testosterone are used to reduce the frequency or intensity of sexual desire. Physical castration is another option, but the advantage of drugs is it requires follow-up visits where behavior can be monitored. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, also known as SSRIs, has been used and were very promising, but only case reports and open-label trials find that SSRIs are helpful. This has not been demonstrated in randomized placebo-controlled trials. SSRIs, however, may be one of the best options because they not only subdue sexual ruminations and urges, but they also help with impulse control. Overall, the big question is, can pedophilia be treated? And the answer to that is no. Pedophilia is a sexual orientation, and just like the other sexual orientations, pedophilia is unlikely to change. Therefore, prevention will probably be the best way to treat pedophilia. We all would like people with pedophilia to not act on their sexual urges because the consequences are quite devastating. Children who have been sexually abused do suffer from negative short and long-term physical and psychological effects. Although efforts to prevent child sexual abuse by targeting potential victims is very admirable, little evidence exists on the effectiveness of these prevention efforts. Current child sexual abuse prevention programs assume that by targeting potential victims, they can reduce the prevalence of child sexual abuse. A report suggests, however, that this idea is flawed. The report states that abuse is so pervasive and the multiplicity of offenders, locations, and approaches so varied that children cannot be given adequate skills to protect themselves. In other words, sexual offender behavior is so varied and diverse that it will be quite difficult to educate children on the many ways child sexual abuse can occur. It is suggested then that potential offenders are more appropriate targets in prevention efforts. So how do we exactly reach out to a group if they are too afraid to come out to society? Well, there has been a project done in Berlin, Germany that aims to prevent child sexual abuse by targeting men who fear they may act on their urges and who seek help without being mandated to do so. This project is known as the Berlin Prevention Project Dunkelfeld, and it aims to reach out to potential offenders through extensive media campaigns in order to treat them. The project is called Dunkelfeld because Dunkelfeld in English means dark field. Hellfeld, which means light field, reflects cases that have been reported. So the project is called Dunkelfeld to represent cases that go unreported, and individuals with no current legal obligation were eligible to participate in the treatment program. The treatment program is based on cognitive behavioral therapy used on convicted offenders, since the superiority of such programs for treating sex offenders has become more and more evident over the past years. Also, the program follows specific concepts of sexual medicine. The treatment program integrates cognitive behavioral options, sexological tools including adult sexual partner if applicable, and medical options. The media campaign was executed through posters placed in print media and on city billboards, and a TV spot was broadcasted on several German TV channels and in cinemas. The headline for these posters can be translated as, "Do you like children more than you or they like?" This suggests that both the potential offender and the child do not want sexual molestation. The project's website, www.kingtiterwerden.de, which translates to "Don't become an offender," was set at free of charge. The aims of the media campaign and public relations were to inform the public of the project associated with the treatment program, and to clearly show to the community the project's standpoint, which is against any sexual contact between adults and children/adolescents, and against protecting offenders. Therefore, it is very important to convey that prevention therapy for potential offenders is proactive child protection and not perpetrator assistance. While all individuals who seek to sexually abuse a child or adolescent should be reached for treatment, only men who have not yet succumbed to their urge but fear they will, men who have sexually abused a child but have gone unreported, and fear they will reoffend, and men who have a criminal record for child sexual abuse and fear of reoffending, provided that they are no longer under supervision of the justice system, were eligible to participate in the treatment program. With respect to the dark field and light field offenders, it is assumed that their motivation for treatment is not under obligation from the justice system, but from internal motivation. After the launch of the media campaign, 476 individuals throughout Europe contacted the research office inquiring about the project and stating an interest in participating. It is important to note that the project had strict confidentiality with the potential offender. Only if the breach in confidentiality served to avert immediate endangerment, that is, the potential victim must be identifiable based on the information provided by a participant. Of the 476 who contacted the project, for unknown reasons, only 286 continued in the phone screening. And of those 286 participants, 241 individuals came to the interview. This was the most important assessment because the researchers wanted to see who would go out of their way to seek treatment. The Prevention Project Dunkelfeld study showed that potential offenders of child sexual abuse may be reached for primary prevention through a media campaign. The relevance of this study is that a significant number of pedophilic or hemophilic individuals who are not under obligation from the justice system are motivated and willing to seek treatment. To prevent child sexual abuse, it seems feasible and worthwhile to offer preventive treatment to pedophilic potential offenders who voluntarily seek help. So my interview of choice is my mother, Gloria Macias, who is an incest survivor. And that being said, she has had undoubtedly encountered individuals that may be diagnosed with pedophilia. So my question to her is, how do you feel about the idea of pedophilia potentially being considered, or actually is being considered, a sexual orientation?
As sexual orientation, that's asking if I believe if pedophilia is, as in homosexuality, is a sexual orientation. I can see the possibilities in that. I can see how some people can say that it's a matter of preference. Pedophiles prefer children, so I could see that. My experience with it is it's been a behavior that has not had any sort of serious consequence. So therefore, I don't know in my personal experience if it was an orientation more than I believe it was a sense of selfishness, and at no point was there any sense of discipline in the behavior. So it was continued to be allowed. So that's, in my opinion, I believe that I can see one side of it being an orientation, because I've known people who have said that they prefer children, but at the same time they knew the behavior was wrong, and it was the hardest thing to fight. In your head, you got to fight that feeling. But then at the same time, I grew up with somebody who honestly was continuously allowed to get away with the fact that he was the known child molester of the family, and it was okay for him to get away with that behavior as long as nobody spoke about it out loud. So yeah, I agree with both. It could be an orientation, but at the same time it can also be something that is just allowed to get away with.
Mm-hmm. So you would agree that pedophilia is considered a sexual orientation, but would you accept it as part of the LGBTQ community?
No, not at all. No, I wouldn't put it in respect to any community, period. It's an illness, it's a sickness, it's a crime. When you have a person involved that has no choices in the matter, it then becomes a crime. It's not an orientation. No, not at all.
So next question, how do you feel about the idea of reaching out to pedophiles and treating them of their behavior?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think more pedophiles would be willing to come forward and get treatment if society wasn't so critical on their behavior. It's not a matter of taking all the pedophiles and putting them on an island and getting rid of them and throwing them away, because it's not reality. The reality is that every person in their family has some sort of pedophile in their family. They just do, whether it be a cousin, uncle, friend, and to make sure that these people get help is crucial for the next generation. And so, along with any other type of disease that people need help for, I believe that pedophiles do need to get treatment.
And you feel like they need to get treatment, not in support of their behavior, but in a way to help prevent future harm for what their behavior could cause.
Yes, of course. They need to address the issue and the problem without being afraid, and then they need to work on rehabilitation. What is it that they can do to change their train of thought in any way, through counseling and therapy, perhaps even antidepressant drugs, whatever it takes in order for them to understand that treatment is available and that there can be help, and that in the end it's a bottom line choice to not harm children, period.
In conclusion, pedophilia is a sexual orientation, so one may wonder if it should be accepted in the LGBTQ community. Since pedophilia is a sexual orientation, this probably should be considered, but for my opinion on that, I would say to not have a part of the LGBTQ community, only because the LGBTQ community, we in a way accept their sexual behavior, and so if we were to implement pedophilia into that community, we would in a way accept pedophilia's sexual behavior. So no, I wouldn't consider it as part of the LGBTQ community, even though pedophilia is a sexual orientation. Although the criteria to diagnose pedophilia needs work, a dominant sexual attraction to prepubescent minors, along with the desire to experience corresponding sexual intimacy, should constitute the key feature of pedophilia. The same goes with the more recent paraphilia known as hebephilia. And finally, we shouldn't shun out people with pedophilia. Instead, we should reach out to them and assist them in controlling their sexual urges. Because it isn't their sexual orientation that's the problem. The problem is the consequences of their behavior.